Paul, you recently wrote a piece with Megan Lamberth about, which goes all the way back to like the Book of Hammurabi. Oh no, it wasn't. It was the, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
in the Mahabharata, to finding arms control
yeah.
examples. What are some lessons that you can learn from this? Let's start with the ancient history stuff. What are some examples there, and how is this stuff relevant today?
Yeah, we have a report coming out at CNAS later this fall from myself and Megan Lamberth, my colleague there, that walks through the history of arms control and then applies some lessons for artificial intelligence. And I think one of the important takeaways is that attempts to control weapons date back to antiquity. The Mahabharata has this line that translated says, there should be no arrows smeared with poison nor any barbed arrows. These are the weapons of evil people. So what's interesting about this is it's not like tactical guidance saying these weapons don't work. It's saying that they're immoral and you shouldn't use them. Um, and these happen throughout history, again, to mixed effect, but historically there are many attempts by humans to say, even while we're killing each other, we're going to set aside some weapons and say these are beyond the pale. And what are the lessons that we can learn from that? I think there are several. One is the importance of clear, sort of rules that people clearly understand what is acceptable and what's not. That people are able to comply with those. That the perceived horribleness of the weapon for some reason outweighs its military value. That's quite important too. Um, but I think there are a lot of lessons that we can apply then to any emerging technology today to come with a sort of historically informed perspective on what might be possible.
One of my biggest takeaways from going through this like incredible appendix you guys have is the idea that like causing more harm than you need to win the particular battle or engagement just strikes everyone as awful. So you have the Mahabharata saying barbed arrows are not cool, which is, presumably the logic is, look, if you get hit by an arrow, you're probably out of commission, and like having to pull it out in a way that, infects you and kills you 2 weeks later is not that relevant when the battle is going to be over by then. 2,500 years later, you have in the early 1900s sawback bayonets, which are basically, this was a weird Google hole I got into, which is basically like a serrated knife that you would put on the end of your, World War I era rifle. It's like literally the same mechanism, right? It's like when you pull it, like if you stab someone with
Yeah.
a bayonet, they're probably done for the day. But if you pull it out, then you're looking at, almost certain death with like awful internal wounds and what have you. And the fact that there was this echo across history just struck me as so interesting and something, I don't know, like encouraging almost about the human condition, that like people from such different cultures from such different time periods saw the same thing as completely unacceptable for warfare.
I do think it's encouraging that even in the midst of wars, humans have historically sought ways to try to regulate violence and limit and cooperate to ensure that the violence isn't worse than it needs to be, even when they're trying to kill each other, which is kind of miraculous when you think about it. The Salmak bayonet's a particularly interesting case. So it was this German World War One bayonet that had a serrated edge for sawing wood. But as you pointed out, when you pull it out of a person, it caused these really grievous injuries. So Germany actually unilaterally pulled this from their forces because reportedly British and French troops would basically torture and kill any German soldier they found with it because they were so upset by this. So sometimes there's this perception that in order for arms control to work, you need a formal treaty that's legally binding and you need these verification mechanisms with inspectors. And those can all help. They can buttress an agreement, they can make it coordination more effective. But they're not necessarily required. And you do have instances, even in the midst of warfare, where there is coordination, sometimes through tacit forms of agreement between various actors to say, hey, look, we're not going to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, this idea of like norms development, even in the midst of a conflict. And it makes me a little more pessimistic if you try to apply that to an AI context. And it's like, okay, it's one thing to literally kill the guy who decided to stick, the serrated knife on their bayonet instead of the other one because he was just trying to save time when he was chopping down his wood or whatever. Versus building in some don't target the hospital code into your AI system. It's like there are many more sort of degrees of separation away from like the person actually deciding to do the thing, which I imagine makes it a lot more difficult in bringing this stuff to software.
I mean, that's right. And that's one of the challenges with AI. And certainly those who've been involved in debates around autonomous weapons, sort of one application of AI in a military context, this has been a frequent issue, which is that ultimately AI is changing the command and control, the decision making process of a system. There may be implications for its physical instantiation, but it's not like bayonet. You could see it and touch it. And so, how do you even know whether or not your enemy is using AI? Right? How do you know whether this targeting decision was made by a human or not? Um, there were, reports of Russians using an autonomous weapon in Ukraine. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical. I don't know that we have enough evidence to make that claim, but even if it were true, how do you prove that? If you see a drone attack a target and you go, well, the decision was made by a computer or a machine. And if you don't know, why does it matter? Um, it may in some contexts, but I think it does make enforcing agreements particularly challenging if you can't verify whether or not the other
Yeah.
side's complying.